You know, there's something rather curious about spiritual awakening that nobody really talks about. People come to me all the time, asking how to see more clearly, how to perceive reality as it truly is, how to wake up from the dream. And I have to laugh a little, because they assume that once you see through the illusion, everything becomes wonderful and easy. But here's the thing, they don't tell you in all those spiritual books and teachings. Seeing what others cannot see carries its own peculiar burden. It's rather like being the only sober person at a party where everyone else is quite drunk. You watch people stumbling about, convinced they're having the most profound conversations, completely unaware that they're repeating the same stories they told 15 minutes ago. And you can't help but see it, can you? You can't unsee it once you've noticed. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When you begin to perceive the interconnected nature of reality, when you start to see through the fiction of the separate self, when you recognize the patterns that most people mistake for solid truth, you've essentially developed a different way of processing experience. You're no longer operating from the same basic assumptions that govern most human interaction. And this creates a fundamental problem in communication. Let me put it to you this way. Imagine you're looking at what appears to be a solid wall, but you can see right through it. You can see the framework, the structure, the empty space between the particles. But everyone around you is still treating it as completely solid, bashing their heads against it, complaining about how hard and impenetrable it is. You try to tell them it's transparent, that they could simply walk through if they changed their relationship to it. But they look at you as if you've gone mad. This is precisely the situation that arises when your perception shifts beyond the conventional. You begin to see that what people call problems are often just thoughts about situations. You notice that most suffering is the mind's resistance to what is, rather than what is itself. You recognize that the voice in people's heads, which they mistake for themselves, is simply a conditioned pattern of thinking running on automatic. But you can't just go around telling people this, can you? If someone comes to you deeply distressed about their life situation, convinced that their story of victimhood or their narrative of failure is absolutely real and solid, you can't simply say, well, that's just a thought you're having. They'll think you're dismissing their pain, that you lack compassion, that you don't understand. And in a way, they're right, because you're no longer understanding in the way they mean it. The ordinary way of understanding is to fully believe in the story, to reinforce the fiction of separation, to agree that yes, the wall is solid and terrible and unfair. It's a kind of conspiracy of agreement, isn't it? We all agree to pretend that our thoughts about reality are reality itself. We validate each other's dreams and call it empathy. But when you've seen through this, genuine empathy becomes more complex. You feel the suffering, absolutely. You recognize that the pain is real, even if the story creating it is fictional. But you can no longer participate in the reinforcement of the illusion that's causing the suffering in the first place. You're in this peculiar position of wanting to help, but knowing that real help means pointing to something the person cannot yet see. You see, there's a kind of loneliness that comes with expanded perception. Not the loneliness of lacking company, but the loneliness of seeing what others don't see. You watch people chase after things you know won't bring them lasting satisfaction. You see them flee from experiences that could actually liberate them. You notice them building elaborate structures of belief and identity that you can clearly see will eventually collapse. And the curious thing is, you can't force anyone to see what you see. You can point, certainly. You can describe it in metaphors and stories. But if they're not ready to look beyond the pointing finger, they'll just examine your finger very carefully and tell you they don't see anything special about it. This is the nature of awakening. It cannot be transmitted like information. It can only be recognized directly. There's another risk that emerges here, and it's rather subtle. When you can perceive patterns that others cannot, there's a temptation to feel special, to identify with being awakened or enlightened or more aware than others. And this is precisely the trap, isn't it? The ego, that sense of being a separate self, is quite clever. It can even co-opt awakening and turn it into a new identity to protect. I am the one who sees clearly. I am the awakened one. But this is just another fiction, another wall being mistaken for something solid. The genuine perceiving beyond ordinary perception doesn't create a superior person. It dissolves the person altogether. You realize that this awareness that sees through the illusions isn't yours at all. It's not a personal achievement or a special talent. It's simply what remains when the conditioned patterns of thought become quiet enough to see clearly. But let me tell you about an even more uncomfortable aspect of this heightened perception. When you can see the mechanical nature of human behavior, when you recognize that most people are operating on automatic programs installed by culture, family, and conditioning, it becomes difficult to take personal interactions at face value. Someone gets angry with you, and you can see it's not really about you at all. It's their conditioned pattern responding to a trigger. Someone praises you, and you can see they're seeking validation for themselves through your approval of their approval. This seeing through doesn't make you cold or unfeeling. In fact, it often increases genuine compassion, because you recognize that people are trapped in these mechanical patterns without knowing it. But it does create a distance, a kind of spaciousness in relationship. You're no longer fully entangled in the drama, because you can see it as drama, as a play of forms, rather than as ultimate reality. Now, there's a profound paradox in all of this. The more clearly you see the illusory nature of the separate self, the more you recognize that there's nobody here who's seeing it. It's not that you have achieved some special perception. It's that the illusion of you has become transparent enough that reality can see itself more clearly through this particular perspective. But try explaining this at a dinner party. Try telling someone that you're not really a separate individual making choices, that thoughts and actions arise spontaneously from the total situation, that free will is a convincing illusion. They'll either think you're denying personal responsibility or engaging in some kind of mystical nonsense. And in a sense, they're justified, because you're challenging the most fundamental assumption upon which society is built, the fiction of the separate, autonomous individual. This is where the real risk lies. When your perception shifts beyond the conventional, you may find yourself increasingly unable to participate in the normal structures of society without a sense of absurdity. You go to work and watch people taking seriously things you know are ultimately a game. You listen to news that presents tribal conflicts as if the tribes were real entities rather than mental constructs. You observe relationships based on mutual neediness being called love. And yet, you must function in this world. You must pay your bills, maintain relationships, and navigate social structures that are built on the very illusions you've seen through. This requires a kind of double consciousness, doesn't it? You see the reality beneath the appearances, but you must also honor the level at which appearances operate. You know the game is a game, but you must still play it skillfully. There's a teaching in Zen that addresses this perfectly. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities continue, but the relationship to them changes completely. You're no longer identified with being the one who chops wood. The wood gets chopped, the water gets carried, but there's no sense of a separate self doing it. It simply happens. But here's what they don't tell you. Living from this non-identified perspective, while surrounded by people who are completely identified with their mental positions, is exhausting in its own peculiar way. Not exhausting like physical labor, but exhausting in the constant need to translate between two different dimensions of experience. You must speak the language of the separate self, the language of problems and solutions, the language of individual achievement and personal development, even while seeing through all of it. And there's always the risk of what we might call spiritual bypassing, using your expanded perception to avoid genuine engagement with life. Oh, it's all just an illusion anyway, so why bother? This is not awakened consciousness. This is the ego using spiritual concepts to justify withdrawal and disconnection. The genuine seeing through doesn't lead to withdrawal. It leads to more authentic engagement, because you're no longer protecting a fictional self. Let me tell you about another hidden risk, the burden of clarity itself. When you can see the causes and effects that lead to suffering, when you can perceive the path that would lead to liberation, watching others choose suffering becomes genuinely painful. Not painful because you judge them, but painful because you see so clearly how unnecessary the suffering is. It's like watching someone drink poison because they believe it's medicine, and knowing that any attempt to stop them will be perceived as an attack. You see your loved ones building elaborate defenses against life, and you know these defenses are the very source of their suffering. You watch them chase after achievements and acquisitions, and you can see that no achievement, no acquisition, will touch the fundamental sense of lack they're trying to fill. You observe them fleeing from present experience into fantasies of past and future, and you recognize that they're missing the only life that's actually available this moment. But the moment you try to point this out, you've become the enemy. Because what you're really saying, beneath all the gentle words and careful explanations, is that their entire way of relating to life is based on a fundamental misunderstanding, and nobody wants to hear that. The ego will defend itself against this recognition with everything it has: anger, argument, ridicule, dismissal. So you learn to be quiet a lot. You learn to let people discover things in their own timing. You develop what might be called strategic ignorance. The ability to not mention what you see when mentioning it would only create resistance. This isn't dishonesty, it's compassion. It's recognizing that awakening cannot be forced, that each person's journey unfolds in its own way. But this too has its cost. There's a part of you that longs for the kind of intimate communication that can only happen between people who share the same basic perception of reality. You want to talk about what you see without it becoming a teaching, without having to carefully manage how you phrase things to avoid triggering defensive reactions. You want the simple joy of shared recognition. The yes, exactly. That happens when two people are seeing the same thing. And yet, paradoxically, the clearer your perception becomes, the more you realize that separation itself is illusory. Those people who seem to be operating from a completely different paradigm, they're not actually separate from you. Their confusion is your confusion. Their suffering is your suffering. The consciousness looking through their eyes is the same consciousness looking through yours, just convinced of a different story. This is where the burden transforms into something else entirely. Once you truly recognize that there's only one consciousness appearing as many, the whole game changes. You're no longer someone special who sees what others don't. You're simply awareness, recognizing itself, temporarily less obscured by mental conditioning in this particular form. And from this recognition, a different kind of relating becomes possible. You no longer need others to see what you see. You no longer feel frustrated by their blindness or burdened by your clarity. You simply shine whatever light is shining through you, knowing that it will reach whoever is ready to see it. And for those not ready, that's perfect too, because their journey is also the one consciousness exploring itself. But make no mistake, the transition to this understanding isn't comfortable. There's a necessary period of disillusionment, a breaking down of all the comfortable assumptions that made life feel solid and knowable. You lose your old certainties before you discover the deeper certainty of not knowing. You lose your old identity before you recognize what you are beneath all identities. And during this transition, you may feel quite alone. The spiritual path has this curious quality. The closer you get to the truth, the less you can talk about it in normal conversation. Not because the truth is secret or esoteric, but because it's so simple and obvious that it sounds like nonsense to the thinking mind. You are not a separate self trapped in a body. You are the awareness in which the entire universe appears. Try saying that at the office water cooler. They'll send you to HR for a psychological evaluation. And yet, this truth is absolutely ordinary. It's not exotic or mystical. It's simply what's happening right now, before the mind labels and divides it into separate things. The sound of these words, the sensation of breathing, the awareness that knows all experience, this is not mysterious. It's the most obvious thing in the world. But we've been trained so thoroughly to ignore the obvious in favor of the conceptual, that pointing to it seems like some kind of mystical teaching. So what do you do with this heightened perception? How do you navigate the world when you can see through it, but others cannot? Well, you begin by recognizing that seeing through is not the same as transcendence. You haven't escaped the world. You're still in it, functioning in it, affected by it. The difference is that you're no longer hypnotized by your own thinking about it. You learn to speak multiple languages. In one conversation, you can discuss the content of someone's problems with genuine interest and practical wisdom. In another conversation, you can point to the watcher of the problems. In yet another, you can simply be present without any teaching agenda at all, just being with what is. The key is not insisting that everyone operate at the level you're perceiving. You also develop tremendous patience because you remember what it was like before you could see clearly. You remember how solid the illusions seemed, how real the separate self felt, how important the stories were. You have compassion for the struggle because you struggled too. And you recognize that struggle is part of the process of awakening, not something to be avoided or transcended prematurely. Perhaps most importantly, you learn to hold your insights lightly. The moment you grasp them tightly, the moment you become identified with being the one who knows, you've lost the essential quality of open awareness. True clarity doesn't belong to anyone. It's not a personal achievement. It's simply what's present when the clouds of conditioning temporarily part. And here's the ultimate paradox. The risk of perceiving what others cannot see is itself an illusion. Because there is no you separate from others, there is no perceiver separate from the perceived. It's all one seamless happening, one awareness appearing as the entire show, including the apparent division between those who see and those who don't. The burden you think you're carrying is being carried by no one, is happening to no one. When this is recognized, not just intellectually, but directly, the whole question dissolves. You're no longer someone special with a burden. You're no longer concerned with whether others see what you see. You're simply this present awareness, expressing itself as this particular form, with this particular clarity, in this particular moment. And that's quite enough. The hidden risk, then, is not really a risk at all. It's just another thought, another concept, another way the mind creates problems where none exist. What you are cannot be burdened. What you are has no problems. What you are is the space in which all experiences, including the experience of feeling burdened by perception, arise and dissolve. So yes, there may be loneliness, there may be frustration, there may be the peculiar exhaustion of navigating between dimensions of understanding, but none of this touches what you fundamentally are. And when you rest in that, when you recognize yourself as the awareness in which everything appears, the risk becomes adventure, the burden becomes play, and the loneliness reveals itself as the intimacy of being everything and everyone, looking at itself through these particular eyes.